The music was perfect and a string quartet played Vivaldi's Spring in the grand hall of St. Clair's Cathedral, where stained glass caught the early afternoon light and spilled it like confetti across rows of polished pews. White roses framed the altar, and the scent of lilac and champagne mingled in the air like a promise. Everything had been planned down to the second for this to be a flawless beginning. Julian Carter stood at the altar in a custom tuxedo, his jaw tight beneath the weight of expectations. Cameras flashed, guests whispered, and Leah McConnell, the governor's poised and pristine daughter, was only seconds from walking down the aisle to become his wife. Until the doors creaked. It was a small sound at first, almost missed. Then came the hush. Every head turned as a child stepped across the threshold, 10 years old at most. Her hair was dark and unbrushed, her sneakers scuffed. But her posture was steady, her gaze unflinching. In her arms, wrapped in a thin blue blanket, she carried a sleeping baby. "Daddy," she called, her voice echoing across marble and mahogany. Whispers rippled. A collective intake of breath surged like a wave. Julian didn't move, not at first. The girl walked farther in, ignoring the stunned stares of the elite and well-dressed. She stood halfway up the aisle, directly under a chandelier that suddenly felt too bright. She wasn't crying. She wasn't lost. She looked like someone on a mission. "My name is Lena," she said clearly. "And I'm here because he's my father." Leah's bouquet dropped with a soft thud onto the tile. The baby stirred in Lena's arms, but did not wake. The silence turned electric. The music had stopped long ago. Behind Julian, someone muttered, "Is this some kind of publicity stunt?" Julian's face, so carefully composed in business negotiations and press conferences, flickered. One blink too long, one breath too shallow. He didn't speak. Sabrina McConnell, the bride's older cousin and head of the wedding committee, was already striding down the aisle, her voice low and sharp. "Get this under control." "Where's security? I don't need to be removed," Lena said before anyone reached her. "I didn't come to hurt anyone." She took a deep breath and looked directly at Julian. "My mom told me to come find you if anything happened to her. She died 2 weeks ago." Her voice broke just slightly enough to betray the cost of the words. "This," she adjusted the baby in her arms, "is my brother. His name is Liam. He doesn't have a dad, or a grandpa, or anyone, except me." Leah turned to Julian. "You know this child?" she demanded, her voice slicing through the tension. Julian's hands clenched at his sides. "I don't know what this is," he said, eyes locked on the girl, but wavering now. Lena stepped closer. "You do. You just don't remember. Or maybe you're pretending not to. But my mom's name was Anne Wolfe. That name." It dropped into the air like a stone in still water. Julian staggered back half a step. The crowd inhaled again. Anne Wolfe. A researcher. A scandal. A disappearance. A name that hadn't surfaced in nearly a decade. Leah's face changed. Confusion twisted into accusation. "Is this true, Julian?" But he didn't answer. His eyes were glued to the child standing in the aisle with the baby. The child with Anne's dark eyes. With her fire. And with something more. Something that felt like truth. The tension grew unbearable. Finally, Lena broke it. "I'm not here to ruin your wedding," she said softly. "I'm here because you're the only person left who might care that we exist." Then, as if on cue, the baby stirred and began to cry. Nobody moved. The baby's cry sliced through the silence like a siren, raw and urgent. Lena rocked him instinctively, whispering something only he could hear. Her composure didn't break, not even under the blistering heat of 100 eyes. Julian Carter stood frozen. He wasn't a man easily rattled. He ran one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the country and had negotiated deals that changed markets. But this wasn't a boardroom. This was his life cracking open in front of hundreds of witnesses. Julian, Leah said, stepping away from the altar. Her voice trembled not with fear, but with fury. Say something. Now. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. You didn't know, she pressed her voice louder now. You never told me about Ann Wolfe. You told me there were no skeletons. I didn't think Julian started, but the words faltered. You didn't think she'd show up, that your past would grow legs and walk into our wedding carrying a baby. Lena held Liam closer, eyes steady on Julian. Not pleading, not begging. Just watching. As if she'd already prepared for him to deny her. As if she knew he would. I'm sorry, Julian said, his voice low and hoarse. I didn't know. You didn't know about the baby? Leah snapped. But did you know about her? Yes, he whispered. The guests gasped again like a synchronized wave of disbelief. Sabrina McConnell appeared beside Leah, face tight with damage control. We can escort the girl out quietly, she said to the bride. We'll release a statement. Say it was a protester or I'm not leaving, Lena said firmly. Not until someone hears me. A security guard reached the edge of the pews, but stopped when Julian raised his hand. No, he said. She's not lying. His words didn't quiet the room, they detonated it. Leah's jaw dropped. You mean this is true? You fathered a child with a woman who disappeared and you never told anyone? It was years ago, Julian said. I didn't even know she was pregnant. Anne, she left. She didn't leave. Lena interrupted. She was fired. And you knew why. Julian's chest tightened. Her voice. Her fire. It was Anne's. She kept everything Lena said, pulling out a sealed envelope from her jacket. She knew no one would believe me unless I brought proof. Julian took a step forward. What is that, letters? Her medical reports? A DNA test, one she ran herself when I was 5. The envelope trembled slightly in Lena's hand, but her gaze never wavered. You're my father, she said. I don't want your money. I want you to tell the truth. Sabrina moved protectively in front of Leah. This is absurd. There are procedures for these things. This isn't how you crash a wedding. It's not a crash, Lena cut in. It's a rescue. The baby cried louder, and for a second all eyes turned to him, red-faced, fists curled, caught in a world he didn't understand. But Lena understood. She'd been his world since the day Anne died. He's sick, she said suddenly. He needs help. Julian blinked. What? He has the same symptoms Mom had before she died, Lena said. But no one at the free clinic will test him without insurance. No one will listen. Silence fell again, heavier than before. Julian stepped closer. Slowly, like approaching a memory you're not ready to relive. You said his name is Liam, he asked. Lena nodded. And Anne? She passed 2 weeks ago. She had liver failure. She was sick for months. I kept asking her to go to the hospital, but she said she couldn't. That no one would help her. Not after what your company did. The words hit like a slap. Gasps echoed again, but Julian wasn't listening to them anymore. He was looking at the child, then at the baby, then at the envelope. The timeline, the name, the look in her eyes. Everything was unraveling, and it had started with a single question. uttered by a girl who refused to be invisible. "Lena," he said quietly, voice catching. "I need to read those letters." She hesitated. Then she held out the envelope. Behind him, Leah was already turning. The ceremony was over. The orchestra had packed up. The roses didn't matter. But Lena was still there. And so was Liam. Julian sat alone in the dim bridal suite, far from the murmurs that still buzzed through the cathedral's grand hall. The celebration had dissolved into whispers and phone calls. Leah had left without a word. Sabrina was likely already drafting a legal statement. His mother hadn't spoken, just locked eyes with him, unreadable, before turning away. But none of that mattered now. What mattered sat heavy in his lap, a plain manila envelope creased and worn, with his name scribbled on the front, in a hand he hadn't seen in almost a decade. Anne's handwriting. He opened it slowly. Inside were 6 neatly folded letters, 1 medical chart, a sonogram, and a dog-eared photograph, Anne holding a baby girl in a hospital bed, her eyes rimmed with fatigue but still burning bright. Lena. Julian's breath caught. The first letter was dated 10 years ago, just a few weeks after Anne had left his life. Julian, I don't know if this will ever reach you, but I had to write it anyway. Because the world we were in, the company, your mother, the research, it became too much. They silenced me. You didn't, but you let them. And now I'm pregnant. With your child. I didn't tell you because I knew what they'd do. They'd find a way to shut it down. They already started falsifying reports. Neosolve isn't safe. It should never have gone to market. But you were too deep in it already. You couldn't see it anymore. Julian stared at the words until they blurred. His hands were trembling. Anne had tried to warn him. He remembered the meetings, the pressure, the manipulation, the way his mother had brushed off Anne's concerns. She's emotional, Mary had said, overstepping her role. He turned to the second letter. Lena is 5 now. You wouldn't believe how much she talks. She's brave, so much braver than I ever was. I tried to keep her out of the system, away from the press. But we're slipping through the cracks. I tried to get her tested for early exposure. No one will touch her. They think I'm crazy. They think I'm dangerous. I miss you. But more than that, I miss who I thought you were. Julian's chest tightened with guilt so thick it felt like drowning. He should have found her. He should have tried harder. He should have listened. Letter by letter, he watched the years pass, Anne documenting Lena's first steps, her own growing health issues, her slow descent into despair as the consequences of silence caught up to her. The 5th letter came just 6 months ago. I'm dying. Slowly, quietly. The damage from the trials is irreversible. I've tried everything. But no one wants a woman with a blacklisted history and no insurance. I've made peace with it. But Lena hasn't. She still thinks you'll come. She still looks at your photo like it means something. I never told her what happened between us. I wanted her to love the version of you that lived in my memory. Not the one that chose his company over his child. He covered his mouth as a sob ripped through his chest. The final page wasn't a letter. It was a certified DNA report. Julian Carter, 9.98% probability of paternity. The document fell from his fingers. He pressed his hands to his face, gripping the sides of his head, like he could keep the truth from splitting him open. He had a daughter. And he had let her mother die, believing he'd abandoned them both. A soft knock broke the silence. He didn't answer. The door creaked open anyway. It was James, his oldest friend and CEO of Carter Biopharma. His tie was undone and his face looked pale under the suite's gold lighting. "You okay?" James asked. Julian shook his head. "No, not even close." James walked in slowly. His eyes fell to the scattered papers and the photograph. He picked it up, staring at Anne's face. "I remember her," he said softly. "She lit up every room, even the cold ones." "She tried to stop us," Julian said hoarsely. "She tried to stop Neosolve. And we crushed her." James didn't deny it. Julian looked up, rage and guilt battling in his eyes. "My mother knew. She knew Anne was pregnant. She knew what Neosolve was doing." James's silence was confirmation. "I need to fix this," Julian said. "I don't care what it costs. The board, the company, the legacy, none of it matters anymore." "You sure?" James asked. "Because this won't be pretty. You open that box, you burn down everything we built." Julian looked back at the photo. Anne, Lena, the newborn baby she'd brought into the world while dying from the consequences of his silence. He stood heart-pounding. Let it burn. The Carter estate sat on the edge of Beacon Hill like an old guard holding its breath. The brick facade, the iron gates, the meticulously trimmed hedges, it was all meant to project power legacy control. Julian parked in the circular driveway without announcing himself. He walked past the housekeeper's curious glance, up the marble steps, and through the grand entrance hall, where portraits of generations past lined the walls. He didn't stop to admire them. Mary Carter was waiting in the sunroom. She always did know when a storm was coming. She sat by the window dressed in a cream cashmere sweater, a book of poetry open in her lap, untouched. The sunlight filtered through sheer curtains and danced across her pearl necklace as if nothing in the world had changed. But everything had. "Julian," she said, not looking up. "You missed your wedding?" He didn't sit. He didn't even blink. "You knew about Anne." Her hand hovered over the page, then gently closed the book. She looked up, composed. "Of course I did." The world tilted. "You knew she was pregnant?" "I suspected," she said calmly. She wasn't exactly discreet. "And once she started making noise about the trials about Neosolve, I had her removed." "You fired her," he said. "You blacklisted her. You destroyed her career." Mary didn't flinch. "I protected the company. Protected you. You were on the verge of inheriting something your grandfather spent a lifetime building." Julian's voice rose. "You protected a legacy. Not me, not her, not our daughter." Mary exhaled slowly, as if she'd been expecting this confrontation for years. Anne was a liability. She had potential, yes, but she was impulsive, emotional, unstable, and she was wrong. "She was right," Julian snapped. "Neosolve wasn't ready, and you knew it." Her eyes narrowed. She had theories, unproven. She didn't understand how things work at scale. "We couldn't afford to let her destroy the launch based on fear." "She died," Julian said, voice trembling. "She died because of us." Mary looked away. "She wrote to me," he continued, stepping closer. "She left records, test results. You silenced her, and she paid for it with her life." Still, she said nothing. Julian stared at her, his hands shaking at his sides. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you wouldn't have let her go," Mary whispered. "You loved her, and love makes men weak when they're supposed to lead." He took a step back as if struck. She continued quietly but firmly. "You were about to take over the company. You were young, ambitious, and already too close to her. I did what was necessary. Julian's voice dropped to a cold hush. You chose the company over your family, over your own grandchild. She was never going to be part of this family, Mary said. Not after what she did. Julian shook his head. She protected her child. She protected our daughter from us. Mary stood now, finally smoothing her sweater like that would fix what had unraveled. It's done, Julian. You can't change it. What matters is what comes next. I'm shutting it down, he said. She blinked. Excuse me, Neosolv. The entire line. I'll go public with the data, with the truth, and I'll resign. The board can pick apart the ashes if they want. Mary's voice dropped to ice. You would destroy everything your father and grandfather built? They didn't build this, Julian said. You did. With silence and secrets. I won't carry that weight any longer. She stepped forward, her eyes sharp. If you do this, they'll come for you. For the company. For our name. The lawsuits alone will bury us. Then let it be buried, he said. Let the truth be what we're remembered for. A long silence passed between them. And in that space, Julian saw it. The crack in her mask, the flicker of shame. But she didn't cry. Mary Carter didn't cry. Instead, she sat back down, opened her book again, and stared out the window. You were always too much like your father, she said quietly. I'll take that as a compliment. Julian turned and walked out, leaving the Carter estate in silence. This time a silence born not of secrets, but of reckoning. The conference room on the 27th floor of Carter Biopharma's Boston headquarters had never been so quiet. 12 chairs, leather-bound and custom-built, surrounded a table that gleamed like polished stone. Framed accolades lined the walls, awards patents, photos with politicians and CEOs. A shrine to power. Julian stood at the head of the table, a man at war with his own kingdom. Every board member was present. Sabrina Voss' PR chair and his former fiancée sat rigid with her arms crossed. James, his longtime friend and COO, avoided eye contact, though he'd stood by Julian's side in the hours since the wedding unraveling. At the far end, Gerald Voss, Sabrina's father and Carter's longest-standing investor, drummed his fingers on the glass surface. Mary Carter was notably absent. She didn't need to be here. Her silence had already spoken volumes. Julian placed a thick folder at the center of the table and looked each board member in the eye. I've called this emergency session to deliver the truth he began. Not spin, not strategy. Truth. A pause. No one moved. He opened the folder. Inside were printed copies of Ann Wolf's letters, internal memos from the Neosolv development team, and a forensic report tracing discrepancies in the original safety trials. I have evidence that the Neosolv trials were compromised. That our team, under pressure from executive leadership, ignored early signs of hepatotoxicity in trial subjects. A murmur passed around the table. Gerald raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Julian continued. The most affected subjects were low-income women in underserved communities. Ann Wolf, a researcher here, and the mother of my child, tried to raise red flags. She was fired, silenced, and later blacklisted. As a result, she died from exposure to the very compound she tried to stop us from releasing. Sabrina's face was pale. Julian, are you saying this on the record? Yes, he said. I am. James sat up straighter. This will gut us, Julian. Lawsuits, criminal investigations, investor flight. You'll sink the company. I know, Julian said calmly. And I accept it. Gerald leaned forward now. Let me get this straight. You're accusing your own company, your mother's company, of corporate negligence. Based on letters and hearsay, Julian pulled out the certified DNA test and laid it in front of him. I'm also confirming that I have a 10-year-old daughter. Her mother's death is on us. And her baby brother, my brother, is now sick with the same symptoms Anne had. We don't get to hide from this anymore. Sabrina's voice cracked. You had a daughter all this time, and you never told me I didn't know. He said, until yesterday. The room fell into a thick silence. Then Gerald spoke again, his tone cold. We can contain this. Settle quietly. Use NDAs. The public doesn't need to know. Julian stared at him. That's exactly how we got here. He turned to the group. I'm resigning as CEO effective immediately. I'll issue a public statement. The board is free to act however it chooses from here, but I'm done living a lie. James looked stunned. And then what? You walk away? No, Julian said. I start again, with integrity this time, with truth, with my children. There it was, the word he hadn't said aloud until now. Children, plural. He wasn't just a CEO. He wasn't just a son or a scientist. He was a father now, twice over. And the only legacy that mattered anymore was the one he would build for Lena and Liam. Gerald rose from his chair, face red with disbelief. You'll torch this place to the ground. Julian didn't flinch. Then I'll be the one holding the match. He picked up the folder and walked out the door, slamming shut behind him. This time, the silence in the boardroom wasn't a pause. It was an ending. And a beginning. Julian stood outside the modest brick townhouse in Somerville, hands trembling. It wasn't the cold. It wasn't the media frenzy still circling his resignations like vultures over a dying beast. It wasn't even the weight of stepping down from the empire he had helped hold together for a decade. It was the doorknob. It was the thought of the girl inside who looked at him not as a CEO, not as a broken man, but as a father, a word that still felt foreign in his mouth. He rang the doorbell. Once, twice. The door opened and Angela Tran stood in the threshold, arms crossed, expression guarded. You're early, she said. I couldn't wait. She stepped aside without a word, and Julian entered. The townhouse smelled like oatmeal and baby lotion. In the corner of the living room sat a pack and play with Liam curled inside, breathing softly. On the floor were scattered drawings, crayon rainbows, stick figures with wild hair, a sun that smiled. And there at the dining table was Lena. 10 years old in a purple hoodie, 2 sizes too big legs, dangling off the chair pencil, frozen in midair. Her eyes met his and held. Not angry, not surprised. Just waiting. Julian cleared his throat. Hi. She didn't say anything. She just stared like she was trying to decide if he was real or part of some story she'd invented to keep herself from shattering. Julian ran a hand through his hair, suddenly very aware of how unshaven he was, how hollow his voice sounded. I came to talk, to explain, if you'll let me. Lena slowly lowered her pencil. You didn't come back last night, she said. I know, I had to face some people. Tell the truth. About me, about everything, he said quietly. Angela stepped out of the room, giving them space. It felt both terrifying and merciful. Julian walked to the table, knelt down beside her. I don't deserve to be called your dad. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I want to try, if that's okay. Lena blinked. You're not going to disappear, not again. Her voice cracked so quiet he almost didn't catch it. People always disappear. He closed his eyes, pain tightening in his chest. I know. and I hate that you've learned that so early." She didn't speak for a long time. "Then, what about Liam?" He glanced at the sleeping baby, then back at her. "He's my brother. I didn't know until recently, but he is, and I'm going to take care of him too." Lena looked down at her sketch pad. She'd drawn the three of them: a tall man with messy hair, a girl with a cape, a baby wrapped in blue. No names. Just three figures holding hands. She pushed it toward him. Julian's voice nearly broke. "You drew this," she shrugged. "I wanted to see what it might look like." He looked at her, really looked. The same eyes Anne had. The same chin. The same quiet strength. "I don't want to be a picture," he whispered. "I want to be there. For real. Every day. School lunches, parent-teacher conferences, bad dreams, everything." Lena stared at him, then reached into her backpack and pulled out a wrinkled envelope. "I kept this," she said. "It's from my mom. The last one." He took it with trembling hands, opened it carefully. Inside was a short letter written in Anne's looping cursive. "If you're reading this, it means I couldn't make it. But I hope you find your way to him. He wasn't ready back then. Maybe he is now. Either way, never forget you were born from love, not mistake." Julian read it 3 times, then looked up. "I was scared," he said. "Terrified. Of her death. Of the truth. Of not being enough. You still scared?" He smiled, bitter and raw. "Every minute." Lena tilted her head. "Good. That means you care." There it was, the smallest opening, a crack in the wall between them. Julian reached for her hand, and this time, she didn't pull away. From the kitchen, the sound of Liam stirring broke the silence. "I'll get him," Lina said, slipping off the chair. Julian stood back, watching her lift her baby brother with gentle hands and settle him in her lap. She knew how to comfort, how to protect. She'd been doing it alone for too long. Angela returned a few minutes later, watching the 3 of them silently from the hallway. "You're not the man I thought I'd meet," she said softly to Julian. "Neither am I," he said. She gave a small nod. "But maybe you're the one they need?" Julian glanced at Lena and Liam. 2 small lives, 2 second chances. He turned back to Angela. "Can I come back tomorrow? Bring diapers," she said, "and maybe learn how to warm a bottle." Julian laughed. It felt strange and shaky, but real. "I can do that." The old flash drive was tucked inside a floral patterned box labeled "For Lena." When the time is right. Angela had found it buried beneath a stack of baby blankets and medical files in Anne's storage bin, which had just arrived from the social worker's office. Julian turned the small device over in his hand, as if it might vanish if he blinked too hard. Lena sat beside him on the couch, holding Liam, who was dozing against her shoulder. Angela watched quietly from the doorway, arms folded, but not intruding. "Do you want to play it?" Julian asked her gently. Lena nodded. "I think Mom left it for both of us." He inserted the drive into his laptop, heart pounding harder than it had at any boardroom meeting, press conference, or lab discovery. This wasn't about the company. This wasn't about redemption. This was about her. Anne. The screen lit up. A folder. Inside it, one video file, titled simply "For Lena." He clicked it. The screen went dark for a moment. And then Anne appeared, sitting in a hospital bed, her hair wrapped in a scarf, eyes tired but glowing. The familiar softness in her voice washed over the room like sunlight through a storm. "Hi, my brave girl." She began, her smile shaky but warm. If you're seeing this, it means I couldn't be there to say all this in person. But I need you to hear it from me. Lena stiffened slightly, but didn't cry. She clutched Liam tighter. I wish I had more time. I wish I could see you turn 11, graduate, fall in love, and yell at me when I embarrass you at school events. I wish I could hold your hand when you're scared. But since I can't, I want you to know a few things. Anne paused, breathing slowly. First, your dad, Julian. I loved him more than I thought I ever could love someone. We were young, complicated, stupid sometimes, but what we had was real. You were made in love, Lena, not by accident, not by mistake. Julian's chest tightened. He felt like he couldn't breathe, like time had reversed and flung him back into the past they never finished writing. I didn't tell him about you because I was scared. And because by the time I wanted to, it felt too late. But I knew someday you'd find him. Because you are braver than me. Anne leaned closer to the camera. If he's with you now, Julian, if you're watching this, I forgive you. I understand. And I hope you forgive me too. Julian pressed a hand over his mouth, overwhelmed by the sheer intimacy of her gaze through the screen. Her voice felt so alive, so present. I also hope, she added softly, that you'll do better than we did. That you'll choose truth over power, family over pride. And that you'll show Lena and Liam that love can grow even from broken places. At the sound of his name, Lena looked down at her baby brother. Her jaw clenched, holding back tears. There's more, Anne said, smiling despite her fatigue. I wanted to leave you something else. Not just memories, but knowledge. Truths. About Neosolve, about the cost of silence. I recorded everything. There's another drive marked red. Keep it safe. Use it wisely. Don't let them erase what happened. She looked down, visibly fighting back tears. My sweet Lena, I love you more than words. And Liam, if you're old enough to understand this, someday know that I fought for you too. That you were born into a messy world, but one still worth believing in. Anne smiled one last time. The screen dimmed, then faded to black. For a moment, no one spoke. Julian reached for the laptop, paused the screen, and sat frozen. He could still hear her voice, not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as something in him threaded through his spine now, in every cell of his regret, in every flicker of what came next. Lena finally spoke voice hoarse. She didn't sound mad. Julian shook his head. She was never mad. She was just hurt and brave. Angela stepped forward. That second flash drive, do you know where it is? Lena nodded slowly. It's in the box under her hospital journals. I saw it. Red label. Julian exhaled. His world, once so carefully engineered in quarterly earnings and science reports, now revolved around flash drives, letters, and children. I want to help tell her story, Lena said. Not just because she's my mom, because it's the truth. Julian nodded, humbled by the gravity in his daughter's voice. And we will, he said. Together. He looked over at Liam, stirring in Lena's arms. This wasn't just rebuilding. This was resurrection. Brick by brick, word by word, truth by truth. Tomorrow they'd start again, but tonight they would sit with her voice. One last message from the woman who had risked everything, not just to uncover a scandal, but to leave a legacy stronger than the silence that tried to erase her. Julian held the red-labeled flash drive like it might explode in his hand. It was surprisingly light, just a sliver of plastic and metal. But inside was everything Anne had hinted at in her final message. The truth. The kind of truth that burns, uproots empires, and turns family into strangers. Lena sat beside him again this time with her fists clenched in her lap. Angela stood behind them, watching as Julian inserted the drive into his laptop. No one breathed. The file folder popped up on the screen. It was organized meticulous, Anne's digital handwriting clear in the labels. Audio recordings, lab reports, internal memos, and one video file titled, "In Case I Disappear." Julian opened the video first. Anne appeared once again, but not in a hospital bed this time. She was sitting on the floor of what looked like an apartment bathroom, her voice low and sharp. "I've made copies of this and sent them to 3 different people I trust. If something happens to me, I want it on the record. I did not take my own life. If this video is being played after my death, it means someone tried to silence me." Julian's stomach dropped. He could feel Lena go rigid beside him. Anne continued, eyes fierce. Neosolve was never ready. It passed animal trials, but failed 2 of the early-stage infant tests. I documented everything. The internal team chose to falsify data under pressure from the board. They wanted a breakthrough at any cost. She paused, voice shaking. I begged them to pull back. Vivian Carter knew. Gerald Voss knew. They threatened me, called me unstable, tried to make it about my postpartum symptoms. But I kept every email, every voice message. Julian stared at the screen, every word hammering his gut like a gavel. His mother, his board, his company. Anne's voice grew quieter. When I found out I was pregnant with Liam, I realized how deep it all ran. Liam was conceived during that time, an accident maybe, but one I never regretted. But once they knew who the father was, it got worse. I wasn't just a liability, I was leverage. Lena's voice cracked. They used her. Julian couldn't speak, couldn't move. He clicked through the rest of the files, dozens of audio logs, one recorded after another. Anne interviewing herself, walking through her findings, reading memos aloud, timestamps embedded in every corner. Angela leaned in. This isn't just a personal reckoning. This is corporate malpractice. It's criminal. Julian nodded slowly. If we release this, the company's finished. Your mother Angela started. We'll be publicly disgraced, Julian finished, along with Gerald Voss and possibly a dozen others. He closed the laptop. Silence flooded the room. I should have known, Julian whispered. Or maybe I did. Deep down, maybe I just didn't want to see it. Lena reached for his hand, and when she touched him, it was like she was anchoring him to the floor. Mom trusted you to do something with this, she said quietly. That's why she gave it to me. Not to hide, to act. He met her eyes. She was braver than I ever was, he said. Angela stepped forward. There's still time to do the right thing. But you have to choose. Julian stood up, crossing to the window. Outside, the city moved on cars, honking lights, flickering people oblivious to the storm that had been building behind Carter Biopharma's glass walls for years. He had spent a lifetime making decisions for shareholders. This one he'd make for her, for Anne, for Lena, for Liam, and maybe finally for himself. He turned back to them. I'll call a press conference tomorrow. Full disclosure. Every file, every name. Angela's eyebrows lifted. That's going to ruin your family's legacy. Julian's jaw set. Then it deserves to be ruined. Lena exhaled and something in her face softened. Not because she stopped hurting, but because she saw that he finally understood. Julian looked down at the red drive one last time. "This isn't just a scandal," he said. "It's a funeral for who I used to be. And tomorrow would be the rebirth." The press conference was scheduled for 10:00 a.m., but the lobby of Carter Biopharma's downtown headquarters was already packed by 9:15. Journalists, legal advisors, security officers, and former employees buzzed with thinly masked curiosity and dread. Outside, news vans circled like vultures. Inside, Julian Carter stood behind the podium, watching the countdown clock on the teleprompter tick toward 0. He wasn't wearing a tie. For the first time in decades, he didn't feel like pretending to be composed. This wasn't a launch. It wasn't a product reveal. It was an unmasking. Angela Tran stood nearby, armed with copies of Anne's evidence. Lena was watching from a secure room upstairs with Derek Linwood, Julian's longtime friend and former COO. Vivian Carter was notably absent. So was Gerald Voss. Julian took a deep breath. When the timer hit 0, the lights went up. The room quieted. Cameras rolled. He began. "My name is Julian Carter. Until today, I was the CEO of Carter Biopharma. But this morning, I'm standing here not as a businessman, but as a father, a son, and a man who let ambition bury his integrity." There was a murmur across the crowd. Julian continued. "Years ago, this company developed a drug called Neosolve, intended to treat neonatal respiratory failure. It promised hope. But the hope we sold came with a hidden cost, one we chose to ignore." He paused. Clinical data was falsified. Failures were buried. Warnings were silenced. One of those voices was Ann Dawson, a brilliant researcher. And the mother of my daughter, Lena. A photo of Anne appeared on the projector screen behind him. The room held its breath. She brought us the truth, and we shut her out. Julian gripped the sides of the podium. "I say we, not to deflect, but to own it. I benefited from the lies. I perpetuated them directly or indirectly. By choosing not to ask harder questions, not to listen to the voices we labeled inconvenient." He looked out into the sea of flashing cameras. "I'm releasing all documentation today. Internal memos, emails, medical reports. They will be uploaded to a public archive accessible to everyone. We've also notified federal regulators and initiated a voluntary audit." He paused again, searching the room. My mother, Vivian Carter, was complicit in maintaining the silence. So was Gerald Voss, former chairman. Both have been asked to step down indefinitely pending investigation. Someone in the front row stood up. "Mr. Carter, are you saying your own mother covered up a drug scandal?" Julian didn't flinch. "I'm saying my family protected its reputation at the expense of truth. And I enabled that culture." Another voice. "Will you resign?" Julian nodded once. "Effective immediately. I've already submitted my resignation to the board." Angela stepped forward, handing out sealed folders to members of the press. Julian's voice softened as he continued. "We can't undo what's been done. But we can stop pretending the past doesn't matter. This isn't damage control. This is a confession." He looked directly into the main camera. "To the families affected by Neosolve, I am sorry. You deserved better. You still do." A long silence followed. The kind that doesn't feel like relief, but like the start of a storm you can no longer outrun. Then the reporters erupted, shouting questions, accusations, speculations. Julian stepped back from the podium and let it fall away behind him. Angela caught up with him at the elevator. That was either career suicide or the most honest thing I've ever seen you do?" "Maybe both," he said. The doors opened. He stepped inside. As they closed, Angela looked at him. "So, what now?" Julian exhaled. "Now I go find my daughter and try to be the man her mother believed I could be." Julian hadn't stepped into his mother's townhouse in over a year. It looked the same immaculate, expensive, guarded by marble and silence. The kind of place where apologies were tucked behind crystal cabinets and family photographs were perfectly aligned, carefully edited. Vivian Carter stood at the window in her cream silk blouse, sipping tea, like she didn't just lose a company and a legacy in 24 hours. She didn't turn when he entered. "I thought you'd wait longer," she said coolly. "Maybe let the dust settle." Julian closed the door behind him. "There's no dust, Mother. Just ashes." Vivian finally turned to face him. Her face was pale but unreadable. "You made quite a show of it." He stepped closer, unblinking. "It wasn't a show. It was the truth." Her eyes narrowed. "And you think that changes anything?" Julian's voice was low, but every word struck hard. "It changes everything." Vivian walked past him, slow and controlled like a queen who refused to let the crown slip, even as the kingdom burned. "Your father built that company." "From nothing," she said, voice tight. "Do you understand what it means to watch it all come undone because of a girl?" "Don't you dare," Julian snapped, stepping in front of her. "Don't call Anne that." Vivian froze. He didn't back down. She was brilliant, honest. And she was trying to protect children, our patients, Mother, our future. Instead, she was gaslit, shut out, and hunted until she died. Vivian's hand trembled slightly, but she set her teacup down with practiced grace. "You don't understand how the world works, Julian." "I understand enough now," he said. "You knew. About the test failures, about Neosolve. You signed off on the internal memos Gerald sent. You buried Anne's concerns. You called her unstable." Vivian didn't respond. He stepped closer. "And when she gave birth to Liam, you knew who the father was, didn't you?" She flinched. "I didn't think it would help anyone to know," she said, voice cracking. "What good would it do to drag your father's name through the mud after he died?" "It would have given her peace," Julian said. "It would have given me the truth." Vivian sat down as if the weight of his words finally landed. Her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I didn't want you to turn against your own blood." Julian crouched in front of her, searching her face for some trace of the woman who used to kiss his forehead. Before science fairs, who whispered, "We're Carters. We endure." "I'm not turning against my blood," he said softly. "I'm trying to cleanse it." For the first time, she looked up at him, eyes glassy with unspoken pain. "I lost your father. I lost you. I couldn't lose the company, too." "You already did," Julian whispered. "But you don't have to lose me." Vivian blinked, stunned. "I'm not asking you to admit everything on camera. I'm not asking you to destroy what's left. I'm asking you to look at me. Really look at me. I'm still your son. And I need you to tell me why." Her shoulders dropped. The wall cracked. "Because I thought if I controlled the story, I could protect you," she whispered. "I didn't want you to know how cruel the world really is." Julian's throat tightened. "You taught me to be strong, but you never taught me how to be honest." Vivian looked away. "It was never my strength." Silence stretched between them, heavy, honest, Finally unfiltered, Julian reached for her hand. Then maybe now's the time. She didn't pull away. In the quiet, something shifted, not a dramatic collapse of old walls, but a soft breath of crumbling mortar. A beginning. Lena stood in the hallway of Child Protective Services, her tiny fists clenched at her sides. She hated the sterile walls, the buzzing lights, the low-toned voices of adults deciding things about kids without asking them first. Liam was in the next room asleep in his carrier, oblivious to the legal storm brewing just outside his nap. Angela Tran paced beside Julian. Her blazer was wrinkled hair, slightly undone signs she'd been working through the night. "We have a narrow window," she said. "Since Liam's mother is deceased and no legal guardian was designated in writing, the state has a say." Julian nodded, jaw tight. "And if I don't act, they'll assign a temporary foster family, maybe more than one. You don't want him passed around." "No." Lena cut in, voice firm, despite the fear behind it. "He stays with us. That's what Mom wanted." Angela looked at her, softening. "I believe you. But the system needs proof. Paperwork, DNA, statements. I have everything Julian said. Birth certificates, Anne's notes, even a hospital nurse's written testimony. Liam is my brother. I'm claiming legal guardianship." Angela gave a short nod. "Then we're filing today." Lena let out a shaky breath. Julian placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "We'll bring him home, Lena." "But what if they don't believe you?" she whispered. "What if they say you're not good enough or too late?" He knelt to her level, the way he had in the hotel suite that first night. "Then I'll fight harder, as long as it takes." Lena looked into his eyes, no longer cold, no longer guarded. There was something raw in them now, something real. She nodded. Angela returned moments later with a stack of forms. "There's one more thing," she said. "The name." Julian looked up. "What do you mean he doesn't have a legal last name yet?" Anne left it blank. She told the nurse she didn't want him branded by bloodlines. "We need to register one before final approval." Julian blinked. "She didn't give him mine." Angela shook her head. "Not officially." Silence filled the hallway. Lena whispered she was afraid that your family might try to erase him. "Like they tried with me," Julian exhaled. "God." Angela handed him the form. "You can give him yours now." "Or hers? Or both?" He stared at the blank line. It was just a name. But not just a name. It was a legacy, a promise, a second chance. He looked at Lena. "What do you think?" She smiled through watery eyes. "He's ours now. Carter is who we are, but Wolf is who we came from." Julian turned back to the form and wrote carefully, deliberately, "Liam Wolf Carter." Angela read it aloud, then nodded. "That's a strong name." Julian nodded too. "He'll need it." As they walked into the room to pick Liam up, Lena slipped her hand into Julian's. "Do you think Mom can see us?" she asked. He looked down at her, voice rough with emotion. "I hope so. Because if she could, he thought she'd see more than just paperwork and apologies. She'd see a family finally learning how to fight for each other. And that more than legacy, more than power, was what would last." The mansion loomed, just as Lena remembered, tall and cold, like something out of a storybook that forgot to end happily. But this time, the gates opened not for a gala or a board dinner, but for a family trying to rebuild. Julian drove slowly up the gravel driveway. Liam slept in the car seat, a soft coo escaping his lips every few minutes. Lena watched the house grow closer through the window, hugging her stuffed bear to her chest. "Will it be different now?" she asked. Julian glanced at her in the rearview mirror. It has to be. The Carter estate had always been a fortress, layers of marble silence and reputation. But now, as Julian pushed open the heavy front door, the air felt still, not grand, not intimidating. Just still, like the house itself was waiting to see who they would become inside it. "Come in," he said gently, helping Lena carry a bag. They walked through the foyer. The light filtered differently now, softer. Not filtered through legacy, but possibility. Liam's coos echoed off the polished walls, and Lena's footsteps followed close behind, sneakers squeaking on the marble. "I used to get lost here," she said, her voice small. "Mom said it wasn't built for kids." "She was right," Julian replied. "But that was before I knew I had them." They stopped in front of a closed door, his old bedroom. Julian opened it. It was still intact, dark wood shelves, neatly made bed photographs from another version of his life. It felt frozen in time, stuck between what was expected and what was denied. "I thought I'd start by changing this room," he said. "It doesn't look like much of a dad's room, does it?" Lena walked to the desk, running her fingers along the smooth mahogany. "Mom's favorite color was green," she offered. "Not the dull kind. The kind that looks like plants are waking up after winter." Julian smiled. "That's a good place to start." Later that evening, after they unpacked boxes of baby supplies and took down 3 oil paintings of long-dead Carters, Julian cooked dinner for the first time in years. It wasn't perfect. He burned the garlic bread and nearly dropped the pasta pot, but Lena laughed for the first time in what felt like weeks. They ate on the floor of the living room, Liam curled in his carrier beside them, the fireplace flickering in quiet warmth. "Do you miss being rich?" Lena asked suddenly. Julian raised an eyebrow. "I still have a house that could fit a basketball court in the dining room." "I think I'll survive." She giggled, but then her voice lowered. "I mean, do you miss being powerful? Being the guy everyone listened to?" Julian set his plate down. "I miss believing I had all the answers. But I like who I'm becoming more than who I was." Lena was quiet for a long time. Then she whispered, "Mom said, houses remember. Remember how people feel inside them, whether they're scared or safe." Julian leaned back, staring up at the ornate ceiling. "Then we have a lot of work to do. This house remembers a lot of fear. But it can remember love, too," she said. That night, Julian stood at the window while the kids slept. Liam in a new crib. Lena curled up in a room she chose herself. Green blankets and fairy lights already taped along the wall. He looked out over the estate, the same lawn where he once practiced speeches and shook hands with board members he barely trusted. Now, it felt like land to be reclaimed, not from others, but from himself. He didn't know how to raise 2 kids. He didn't know how to erase the damage done by decades of denial and silence. But he knew how to start telling the truth. And maybe that was enough. Lena found the envelope on a rainy Tuesday morning. She hadn't meant to go exploring, at least not beyond the kitchen, but curiosity had always lived under her skin like a second heartbeat. And the hallway closet wedged between the library and the east stairwell seemed to whisper secrets through its dusty brass handle. She tugged it open and sneezed. Blankets, a moth-eaten coat, a broken clock, and at the very back a box sealed in wax paper and tied with a faded green ribbon. She pulled it out carefully, noticing the tag still clinging to the ribbon's edge. It read in smooth, familiar handwriting, "For Lena, when it's safe." Her breath caught. She ran to Julian, still in sweatpants, barefoot in the study. "Look," she said, holding it up like treasure pulled from the deep. Julian blinked. He took the box, reading the label with a growing stillness. "That's Anne's handwriting," he whispered. They opened it together at the kitchen table. Liam babbled softly in his bouncer seat, as if sensing the shift in the air. Inside, nestled between two children's drawings and a pressed sprig of lavender, was a letter. Handwritten ink, slightly faded, sealed with a wax imprint, a tiny, imperfect wolf. Julian's hands trembled. He glanced at Lena. "Do you want to read it?" She nodded. He unfolded the paper with reverence, as if touching something holy. "My dearest Lena, if you're reading this, it means you made it. You're safe, you're brave, and you are not alone anymore. I'm sorry I couldn't be there to explain everything. You deserve more than secrets and fear. But sometimes protecting someone means stepping into the storm so they don't have to. I loved your father, truly, even when he couldn't see past his pain. And I know now he's trying. There's a truth I never got to tell you. This house, it wasn't always cruel. Once it held laughter. Once I thought we'd raise you here together. But people forget how to be kind when they're afraid of losing what they've built. Even your grandmother. Forgive them when you can. But never forget who you are. You are not a shadow of someone else's name. You are light, fierce, bright, and entirely your own. And if you ever feel lost, remember the garden behind the conservatory? I left something there for you. With all my love, Mommy." By the time they reached the last line, Lena's face was streaked with tears. Julian stared out the window, jaw tight, chest rising with shallow breaths. "She wrote this here," Lena said, voice breaking. "In this house." Julian nodded slowly and hid it, because she didn't trust it would survive in plain sight. They stood in silence for a moment, the house groaning softly as if waking from a long sleep. Then Julian looked at her. "You want to find what she left in the garden?" Lena nodded. The garden behind the conservatory had long been overtaken by ivy and overgrown hedges, but the path still remained if you knew where to look. Julian helped Lena step over roots and duck under brambles until they reached the old fountain dry and chipped at the edges. There, tucked behind the base, was a rusted tin box. Inside, a photo of Anne holding infant Lena in her arms, a small wolf-shaped pendant, and a folded napkin from the old diner where Julian had first kissed her. Lena held the pendant close. She didn't forget. "No," Julian said. She remembered everything this house wanted us to forget. They stood there a long while, father, daughter, and baby brother, asleep in his carrier, surrounded by weeds and ghosted dreams. And for the first time, the house didn't feel haunted. It felt like home. The conference room at Carter Pharmaceuticals was colder than usual. Not because of the air conditioning, but because of what was about to happen. Julian stood at the head of the table, the morning light casting long shadows across the polished surface. His reflection wavered, fractured by the glass, just like the foundation beneath this company. Across from him sat the board, a row of calculated expressions, expensive suits, and legacy shareholders who had shaped the company into a pharmaceutical titan. His mother, Vivian, was among them, regal and rigid in posture, a diamond brooch gleaming like a symbol of authority, too long unchallenged. Julian placed a thick folder on the table with a quiet thud. "This," he said calmly, "is the internal data set proving NeoSolve's adverse effects on infants under 6 months old." A beat of silence. No one moved. He opened the folder. Pages spilled out scans, charts, testimonies. Then came the USB, the one labeled in Anne's handwriting, the one that nearly burned a hole in his pocket from the weight of what it held. "We had this information for years," he said, voice rising with restrained fury. "It was buried. Not by accident, but by choice. because the risks didn't affect shareholders. Just children. Charles Marlowe, the oldest board member, shifted in his chair. Julian, if you leak this, the damage to our reputation will be irreversible. Our reputation, Julian said, laughing bitterly. You're still worried about press releases? Vivian's lips pressed into a thin line. You're asking us to tear down decades of work. Your father, your grandfather built this empire. No, Julian replied. They built a facade, a house of cards leaning on silence and settlements. I'm asking us to build something honest. Murmurs rippled down the table. Someone whispered whistleblower protections. Another lawsuits. Bankruptcy. Julian didn't care anymore. He looked each person in the eye, ending with Vivian. I will not carry this lie into another generation. Liam deserves better. Lena deserves better. I deserve better. Vivian flinched at the mention of the children. For a moment, Julian saw not the board chairwoman, but his mother. Just a woman who had chosen silence out of fear. And now that silence was cracking. He reached into his coat and pulled out the formal resignation letter. He laid it beside the folder. I'm stepping down as CEO, effective immediately, he said. And I'll be giving all the documentation to federal authorities and the press, whether this board supports me or not. The room went still. No one expected the heir to the empire to burn the throne. Vivian spoke last. You'll destroy this family, she whispered. Julian shook his head. No, I'm saving what's left of it. He turned to leave. But before he could step through the door, Vivian's voice called out again, this time quieter, less regal. Julian, he paused. I was wrong, she said. I thought protecting the legacy meant protecting silence. But you're right. The truth matters more. He turned halfway. Their eyes met across the room, mother and son finally standing on the same side of the storm. She added, Let me make the announcement with you. And that was the moment it broke, not the legacy, but the illusion of power it had held. 3 weeks had passed since the press conference. The building that once bore his grandfather's name now stood quiet. Its glass facade reflecting the city skyline, a monument to what had been lost and what might yet be rebuilt. Julian Carter didn't return to his office. He had no need to. The story was no longer his to protect. It was his to release. In that time, NeoSolve had been pulled from shelves. A federal investigation had begun. Lawsuits were inevitable, but so was the wave of messages from families who had lost children from doctors who'd questioned but been silenced from whistleblowers who finally felt safe enough to speak. Julian read every one. He didn't sleep much. Not because of guilt anymore, but because his life was full now. Of purpose. Of children. Of late-night feedings and early morning school drop-offs. Of laughter. Lena had started calling him Dad, without hesitation now. She liked to practice saying it under her breath, like trying on a new name for someone you knew all along. Liam cooed and reached for him every time he entered the room. The boy's trust was effortless. Undeserved, perhaps, but real. One afternoon, as they sat in the sunlit nursery, Julian turned to Lena. Do you know what it means to be an heir? He asked. She furrowed her brow. Like someone who gets all the money when someone dies? Julian chuckled. That's one way to look at it. But it's also about what you carry forward. Not just money or a house. Ideas, choices, patterns. Like secrets, she asked, eyes sharp. He nodded, and the courage to break them. Lena leaned her head against his arm. Then Liam is a different kind of heir. Julian looked at his son. So are you. The official formation of Wolf and Carter Health was announced on a Thursday. It wasn't glamorous. No ribbon cutting or gala dinner. Just a modest office near the waterfront housed in a shared space with other independent health startups. Julian didn't want spotlights. He wanted sunlight. This time, the company wouldn't operate behind closed doors. Its mission was stamped on every letterhead: truth heals. Transparency protects. He staffed it with a team of scientists and ethicists, many of whom had once left Carter Pharmaceuticals in protest or disappointment. Now they returned not for profit, but for purpose. And at the top of the list, printed in quiet, bold letters, was the name of the co-founder, Ann Wolfe. In memoriam. He didn't want her forgotten. He wanted her truth to live on in every decision, every policy, every step forward. Vivian came to visit the new office a few days after the launch. She wore no makeup, no heels, just a light gray coat and a look of someone finally willing to be seen without armor. I read the statement, she said. It was brave. Julian motioned for her to sit. It was overdue. She looked around the room. No mahogany paneling, no private elevator. Just plants, open desks, and photos of children on the wall. I used to think legacy meant building something big enough to last forever, she said softly. Julian nodded. And now Vivian met his eyes. Now I think it means raising something that can stand without you. Her gaze shifted to the framed photo of Lena and Liam by the window. I brought something, she added, reaching into her purse. It was a silver rattle. Old, polished, inscribed, "To J.C. May you grow with grace." Julian recognized it. His father had given it to him as a baby. I thought it was lost, he said. It almost was, Vivian replied, like so many things. He held it, the weight small but heavy in meaning. I want Liam to have it, she said, and I want to earn the right to be in their lives. Both of them. Julian didn't answer right away. He looked toward the office door where laughter echoed from the small playroom he'd set up where Lena was showing Liam how to stack blocks. They need family, he said. Real family. Vivian nodded. Then I'll learn how to be that. That night, Julian stood on the balcony of their modest new apartment. Liam asleep against his chest, and Lena curled up reading beside the sliding door. He didn't have an empire anymore. But he had something better. A truth that no longer haunted him. A name that meant healing, not harm. And a family not defined by blood alone, but by choice, by courage, and by love, rebuilt from ruin. Epilogue. Wolfe and Carter Health Launch. The conference room was small, sun-drenched, and smelled faintly of lavender from the bouquet Lena had arranged that morning. There were no camera crews, no catered spreads. Just a group of 20 people, scientists, advocates, parents sitting shoulder to shoulder, all here for the same reason, to witness the birth of something that mattered. Julian stood behind a repurposed oak podium, one hand resting lightly on the edge, the other cradling a photo of Ann Wolfe. She believed in truth. He said, his voice quiet but firm, even when it cost her everything. Lena sat in the front row, legs crossed chin high. Liam gurgled softly in Vivian's lap, a red balloon string wrapped around his tiny wrist. Julian continued. This company isn't here to protect a brand. It's here to protect lives. It carries her name, not because it sounds good in press releases, but because it reminds us why we exist. Wolfe and Carter. Health is built not on legacy, but on loss and what we choose to do with it. He paused. We will never again trade safety for silence. There was no applause, no fanfare, just stillness, the kind that comes when something broken is made whole again. Later, as the attendees mingled in the open concept lounge, sipping coffee, passing baby Liam around, sharing stories of heartbreak and healing, Julian stepped out to the balcony. The harbor shimmered under the late spring sun. He closed his eyes and let the breeze pass through him. In his pocket, he carried Claire's old locket inside 2 tiny photos, Lena on one side, Liam on the other. Vivian joined him a moment later, no longer wearing pearls or power suits. Just a linen blouse, soft and clean. "He's going to change the world," she said, watching Liam from a distance. Julian smiled. "They both will." Vivian looked at him, something unreadable in her eyes. "And what about you? I already have," he said. "Not the world, just my corner of it?" She nodded. That was enough. Inside, Derek Linwood was trying to teach Lena how to whistle. Lucy Martinez from CPS was handing out business cards. And someone had written on the office whiteboard in thick red marker, "Healing starts with honesty." Julian took it all in, the voices, the laughter, the ghosts, finally laid to rest, and let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding for years. Anne was gone. The old Carter name was gone. The empire was gone. But this was the future, and it was alive.